"Get this man away from me. He's been following me all night." My wife said it with the kind of calm that made the lie sound official. For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. 8 years of marriage can do that to you. Your mind rejects certain words when they come from the person who knows where you keep the spare house key, how you take your coffee, and which side of the bed you sleep on. But Claire didn't correct herself. She stood beneath the glass lights of Apex Meridian's executive lobby, one hand resting against the stem of a champagne glass, while 2 security officers looked at me like I had wandered in from the street. Around us, conversation slowed. People pretended not to stare. Claire's co-workers knew her as Clare Walker, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, one of the fastest rising executives in the company. They knew the tailored navy dress, the polished smile, the confidence that made a room seem to rearrange itself around her. What they apparently did not know was me. My name is Nathan Walker. I was 46 years old, married to Claire for 8 years, and standing less than 10 feet from the woman who had just told corporate security I was harassing her. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from Mrs. Walker," the taller officer said. His badge read Ryan Caldwell. His voice wasn't rude, just professional. I looked at Claire instead. "Mrs. Walker?" I repeated. Her eyes flicked toward the executives gathered near the reception desk. That tiny movement told me more than an argument ever could. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of them knowing me. "Claire," I said quietly, "tell them who I am." Her jaw tightened. For half a second, I saw the woman I had married. Then the executive mask came back down. "I already told you not to come here," she said. That wasn't true either. She had told me she thought the annual leadership reception would be boring for me. She had told me there would be people I didn't know, conversations I wouldn't enjoy, and a dress code I would probably hate. She never said I wasn't allowed inside. More importantly, she didn't know I had another reason to be in the building that night. Ryan stepped closer. "Sir, please come with us." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pull away. I didn't make a scene. I just kept looking at my wife. "Is that really what you want to tell them I am?" I asked. Claire swallowed. "Please remove him." For words. That was all it took. Not to end a marriage. Not yet. But to crack something I had spent 8 years believing was solid. Ryan placed a careful hand near my elbow, guiding rather than grabbing. I could feel every pair of eyes in the lobby shifting toward us. A few people whispered. Someone near the bar stopped mid-sentence. Claire looked relieved. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the security officers. Not the staring. Her relief. She thought the problem was about to disappear through the front doors. Then the executive elevator opened behind us. A soft chime cut through the room. I heard footsteps on marble, quick at first, then suddenly slower. Ryan turned his head. Claire did too. Jonathan Mercer, CEO of Apex Meridian Technologies, stood 20 feet away with 2 board members behind him. Jonathan looked at me, then at Ryan's hand near my arm, then at Claire. The color left his face. "Ryan," he said. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just one name spoken with enough weight to stop the entire lobby. Ryan straightened. "Mr. Mercer, we have a situation. Mrs. Walker says this gentleman has been harassing her." Jonathan stared at him for a beat, then walked closer. The room became so quiet I could hear the low hum of the elevators behind the wall. He stopped beside us and lowered his voice. "Take your hands off him." Ryan blinked. "Sir." Jonathan glanced at me, then back at Claire. "That's Nathan Walker." No one reacted. The name meant nothing to most of them. Claire looked confused, almost annoyed, as if Jonathan had interrupted something inconvenient. Then he leaned toward Ryan and said the sentence that changed the temperature in the room. "That's our majority owner." Claire's expression didn't collapse all at once. First came confusion, then disbelief, then something colder. Calculation. She looked at me as if I had become a stranger in the space of 6 words. But the truth was simpler than that. I hadn't changed at all. She had just discovered that the man she was ashamed to call her husband owned 61% of the company she had spent 3 years trying to conquer. 3 hours earlier, none of that had happened yet. I was standing in our kitchen with one hand around a coffee mug, watching the last light of the day stretch across the hardwood floor while Claire moved through the house upstairs. I could hear closet doors opening, hangers sliding, heels crossing the bedroom floor. She had been preparing for the leadership reception since late afternoon, and every few minutes she called down another reminder that sounded less like conversation and more like instruction. "You really do not need to come tonight, Nathan." I looked toward the staircase. I know. A few seconds passed. It is mostly senior leadership and clients. I know that too. Her footsteps stopped. Then came the sentence I had already heard twice that week. You would probably be bored. I smiled into my coffee, but there was no humor in it. Claire had developed a careful way of excluding me without ever using the word exclude. She never said, I do not want my husband there. She said the parking would be difficult. She said the conversations would be dull. She said I hated networking. Each explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they formed a wall. What she did not know was that I had already planned to be inside the building. At 4:30 that afternoon, Jonathan Mercer had sent me a short message confirming an ownership review with 2 board members before the reception. Nothing unusual. Walker Capital held meetings there several times a year, and I usually entered through the private garage, took the executive elevator upstairs, handled business, and left before most employees ever knew I had visited. I had spent years keeping it that way. Ownership had never interested me as a performance. I did not need an office with my name on the door. I did not need employees standing when I entered a room. I cared about numbers, leadership, long-term decisions, and whether the people running the company understood the responsibility they had been given. Claire knew I invested in companies. She knew Walker Capital existed. She knew I had stepped away from daily operations years ago. What she had never bothered to learn was which companies sat inside that portfolio. Early in our marriage, she used to ask questions. She would sit across from me at dinner and listen while I explained acquisitions, debt structures, and why I preferred businesses that could survive bad years without treating employees like disposable expenses. Somewhere along the way, her questions became shorter. Then they disappeared. By the time she joined Apex Meridian 3 years earlier, she described my work to people as private investing. Technically correct, conveniently vague. I never corrected her. I wanted her career there to belong to her. No calls from me. No special introductions. No quiet pressure on Jonathan. When she earned her first promotion, I opened a bottle of California Cabernet and told her I was proud. When she earned the second, I took her to a steakhouse in downtown Chicago where she talked for 2 hours about her team, her strategy, and the executives finally beginning to notice her. I listened. I meant every word when I told her she deserved it. But success changed the way she looked at rooms. Then it changed the way she looked at people inside them. Eventually, it changed the way she looked at me. That evening, she came downstairs in a dark blue dress and paused near the kitchen island. You are not dressed. Not yet. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Nathan. There was something in the way she said my name that made me set the mug down. What? Please do not make tonight complicated. I studied her face. How would I do that? She adjusted one of her earrings and looked away. You know how corporate events are? Everyone talks about titles, projects, promotions. It is exhausting. And you think I cannot handle exhausting conversation? That is not what I said. No, it is not. Silence settled between us. She picked up her clutch. I just want one night where I can focus on work. I nodded. Then focus on work. Relief crossed her face too quickly. She kissed my cheek, told me she would be home late, and walked out to the rideshare. Waiting at the curb, I stood at the front window and watched the car disappear at the end of the block. Then I went upstairs, opened the closet, and took out a charcoal suit I had not worn in months. At 5:45, I drove toward downtown. The city lights were beginning to reflect off the glass towers along the river, and Apex Meridian rose above them like a polished monument to ambition. Claire saw that building as the place that had made her important. I saw it differently. I remembered what it looked like 11 years earlier when its future could be measured in weeks, not decades. I remembered the emergency meetings, the debt calls, the empty forecasts, and the decision that kept the doors open. Claire had spent 3 years climbing inside that company without ever asking who had paid to keep the ladder standing. I did not know then that by the end of the night, that forgotten detail would become the only thing anyone in the lobby could talk about. When Claire and I first met, she liked that I did not look like the men she worked around. I owned one decent suit, drove a 5-year-old pickup, and never cared whether a restaurant had white tablecloths or paper napkins as long as the food was good. Back then, she said I made her feel grounded. She was 33, ambitious, sharp, and working 12-hour days for a consulting firm that treated exhaustion like a promotion requirement. I was 38 and already stepping away from the kind of schedule that had consumed most of my 30s. We met at a charity fundraiser in Milwaukee after a mutual friend introduced us near the coffee station. Claire asked what I did. I told her I invested in struggling companies and tried to make them healthy again. She laughed and said, "So you fix businesses?" I told her that sounded better than anything printed on my business card. She liked that answer. For years, she liked a lot of things about me that would later seem to embarrass her. She liked that I repaired things around the house instead of calling someone. She liked that I knew the name of the guy who changed the oil in my truck. She liked that I could sit through dinner with executives and talk just as easily with the waiter clearing the table afterward. Claire used to call it confidence. Somewhere along the way, she started calling it simplicity. Then simplicity became a flaw. The change did not happen overnight. That would have been easier to recognize. It came in inches. A comment about my jacket before a company dinner. A suggestion that I let her choose my tie. A joke about my truck when one of her coworkers bought a new German sedan. Nothing serious. Nothing worth turning into an argument. At least that was what I told myself. After she joined Apex Meridian, those little comments became more frequent. "Maybe do not mention that you are semi-retired," she said before one event. "People here are strange about ambition." I remember looking at her and asking, "Am I supposed to pretend I am unemployed?" She smiled like I was making things difficult. "Just say you manage investments." That was exactly what I did, so I let it go. 6 months later, she introduced me to a vice president named Martin as Nathan, my husband. He does some private investing. Some. I had spent 20 years building companies, buying companies, saving companies, and occasionally closing companies that could not be saved. But I watched Martin nod at me with polite disinterest and said nothing. Claire seemed relieved when the conversation moved back to her. That relief became familiar. At home, she still asked about my day, but her eyes often stayed on her phone. When I answered, she would nod at the right moments without really hearing me. Her own stories grew longer. A new client. A difficult executive. A dinner with the chief financial officer. A meeting where Jonathan Mercer had praised her presentation. I listened because I loved her. I remembered names. I asked questions. I celebrated her victories. What I did not notice soon enough was that the more important Apex made her feel, the less important our life seemed to become. Invitations started arriving with one name instead of two. At first, she blamed limited seating. Then she said spouses usually skip these things. I knew that was not true. I had seen the photographs. Husbands, wives, partners, smiling beside the same people. Claire insisted preferred employees to attend alone. I never confronted her with the pictures. Part of me wanted to see how far she would take it without being pushed. Another part did not want the answer. The first time it truly bothered me was at a holiday dinner 18 months earlier. Claire had asked me to meet her downtown after work. I arrived 10 minutes early and found her standing with 3 coworkers near the entrance. She saw me through the glass. I watched recognition cross her face, followed immediately by something I could not name then. Not happiness. Not surprise. Calculation. When I walked inside, she introduced me quickly and moved the group toward the dining room before anyone could ask much about me. Later that night, I heard one of them say, "I did not even know Claire was married." She laughed. "I keep my personal life separate." I remember holding my water glass and thinking that marriage was a strange thing to classify as personal life when you wore the ring every day. I said nothing. That became my mistake. Silence is useful when you are listening. It is dangerous when you use it to avoid what you already know. By the time of the annual leadership reception, Claire had stopped asking whether I wanted to attend corporate events. She simply explained why I should not. I had become something she edited out before entering the room. And sitting in my car outside Apex Meridian that evening, watching employees in suits cross the bright lobby behind 20-foot glass walls, I finally admitted what I had been avoiding. My wife was not protecting me from a world I would dislike. She was protecting that world from having to meet the husband she had decided no longer matched the version of herself she wanted everyone to see. From the sidewalk, Apex Meridian looked almost too clean to have a history. 38 stories of blue glass rose above the river, reflecting downtown lights in long silver streaks, while the company logo glowed over the main entrance like it had always belonged there. Claire saw that building as proof that she had made it. I saw 11 years of decisions nobody in the lobby knew about. I parked in the underground garage just before 6 and sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching employees cross toward the elevators with event badges clipped to expensive jackets. I could have used the private entrance. My security clearance still worked there, and Jonathan had made sure my access never expired. Instead, I took the public elevator from the garage. I wanted coffee before the ownership review, and there was a small cafe beside the main lobby that made a decent dark roast. Nothing more complicated than that. At least, that was what I told myself. The truth was, some part of me wanted to see Claire in the world she had worked so hard to keep separate from me. The elevator opened onto polished stone floors and 20-foot windows overlooking the river. White floral arrangements lined the reception tables. Waiters moved between groups carrying sparkling water, wine, and small plates of food that looked too carefully arranged to eat. A string quartet played near the far wall, soft enough that executives could still hear themselves discuss quarterly numbers. I had attended hundreds of corporate events in my life. They all had the same rhythm. Handshakes that lasted half a second too long. Compliments that doubled as questions. Smiles that disappeared the moment someone more important entered the room. Apex had not always looked like this. 11 years earlier, the company occupied 3 aging buildings outside Milwaukee and carried enough debt to make every Monday morning feel like a countdown. Suppliers wanted cash before delivery. Banks wanted guarantees management could not give. 2 major customers were preparing to leave. The board had spent months searching for capital while pretending publicly that everything was under control. I was 35 then, still running Walker Capital from a rented office with stained carpet and a heating system that worked whenever it felt generous. Jonathan Mercer was not the polished chief executive people knew now. He was a division president with tired eyes and a business plan nobody wanted to finance. He came to see me on a February morning carrying a cardboard box filled with financial statements. We spent 9 hours at a conference table, going through them line by line. At midnight, he finally asked the question everyone else had avoided. Can this company survive? I told him the truth. Not like this. He nodded once. No speeches. No excuses. That was why I listened when he showed me what Apex could become if someone gave it time instead of another short-term loan. 3 weeks later, Walker Capital led the restructuring. I put more of my own money into that deal than my advisors thought was reasonable. We closed in profitable divisions, renegotiated debt, sold property the company did not need, and protected the parts that actually worked. It was not glamorous. For 2 years, success meant surviving another quarter. Then surviving became growing. Growing became expansion. Milwaukee became Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, and eventually international contracts. Jonathan became chief executive. I became the person he called when the board needed a decision nobody wanted attached to their name. My ownership increased through later financing rounds until Walker Capital controlled 61% of the voting shares. Most employees never knew. They did not need to. I preferred it that way. A company should not depend on employees recognizing the owner in an elevator. It should depend on competent people doing their jobs when nobody important is watching. That principle was also why I had stayed completely out of Claire's career. When she applied to Apex, she did not ask for my help, and I did not offer it. Jonathan called me the morning Human Resources forwarded her final interview package. Do you want me involved? He asked. No. Does she know? She knows I invest in companies. She does not know the details here. Jonathan paused. You are comfortable with that? I told him I was. If Claire earned the job, I wanted it to be because she deserved the chair, not because someone was afraid of the man she shared a mortgage with. Looking back, I can see the irony clearly. I protected her independence so carefully that she eventually mistook my absence for insignificance. I crossed the lobby that evening with my coffee in one hand and passed a wall displaying photographs of Apex milestones. New headquarters, manufacturing expansion, public service awards. Claire had probably walked past those pictures hundreds of times. She saw history. I remembered the checks. Near the elevators, I spotted her across the reception floor surrounded by senior executives, smiling beneath the lights like she had been born there. She looked confident, successful, completely at home. Then her eyes found me. The smile stayed on her face for everyone else, but something behind it went still. Claire held my gaze for maybe 2 seconds before excusing herself from the group around her. She crossed the reception floor quickly, smile still fixed in place until she reached me near the elevators. Then it disappeared. What are you doing here? She asked. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind people use when they do not want anyone nearby to know there is a problem. I took a sip of coffee. I had a meeting. She glanced toward the executives behind her. Here. Yes. With who? I looked at her for a moment. Does it matter? Her fingers tightened around her clutch. Nathan, I specifically told you tonight was important. You told me I would be bored. You knew what I meant. That sentence landed harder than it should have. I looked past her toward the room. Evan Ross, the chief operating officer, stood about 20 feet away talking with two regional presidents. He noticed Claire looking back and gave her a questioning smile. She immediately turned toward me again. Please, she said. Can we not do this here? Do what? Whatever this is. I almost laughed, but nothing about her expression was funny. I came to the building for a meeting, Claire. I saw my wife at a reception. I walked over to say hello. She lowered her voice another notch. You should have told me. Why? She hesitated. That hesitation was becoming familiar. Every important truth seemed to live inside the space before Claire answered. Because I could have prepared people. I stared at her. Prepared them for what? Her eyes moved toward my charcoal suit, then back to my face. It was subtle. She probably did not even realize she had done it. That is not what I mean. Then tell me what you mean. Before she could answer, Evan approached us carrying a glass of sparkling water. He had the smooth confidence of a man who spent most of his life in conference rooms where everyone already knew his title. Claire, he said, then looked at me. Everything all right? Claire turned slightly, positioning herself between us. Fine. Just handling something. Handling something. Not talking to my husband. Not introducing Nathan. Handling something. Evan gave me a polite nod. Do we know each other? Not yet, I said. Claire jumped in before I could say more. Nathan was just leaving. Evan looked at her, then at me. Nathan. I waited. Claire could have ended the entire moment with 4 words. He is my husband. 4 words. She had said them 100 times before. At neighborhood cookouts. At restaurants. At my friends' homes. But standing in the lobby of the company where she had built her new identity, those words suddenly seemed too expensive. Claire, I said quietly. Tell him. Her face tightened. Evan looked confused. Tell me what? Claire forced a short laugh. It is nothing. He is someone I know personally. Someone I know personally. 8 years compressed into 5 words. I felt something inside me go still. Not anger. Clarity. Evan glanced toward the reception area as 2 more executives approached. Curious now, because curiosity travels faster than any announcement in a corporate lobby. Claire saw them coming. Panic flickered behind her eyes. Nathan, please leave. After my meeting. What meeting? Jonathan invited me. She stared at me. Jonathan Mercer? Yes. Her disbelief arrived so quickly, it almost looked like offense. Do not do that. Do what? Use his name like you know him. That was the moment I understood how completely she had rewritten me in her mind. She did not think I was lying because I had given her a reason to distrust me. She thought I was lying because the version of Nathan Walker she presented at work could not possibly know Jonathan Mercer. Evan shifted uncomfortably. One of the executives beside him whispered something. Claire noticed. Her cheeks flushed. This is exactly what I did not want tonight. Me standing here? I asked. She closed her eyes for a second. You making a scene. I looked around. I had not raised my voice. I had not interrupted anyone. I was holding a paper coffee cup near an elevator. The only scene existed in her fear of being connected to me. A security officer near the front desk had begun watching us. Claire saw him too. Then she made a decision I still think about. She lifted one hand and motioned him over. Ryan Caldwell approached professionally. Is there a problem, Mrs. Walker? Claire looked at me once. I gave her every chance to stop. Claire, I said, tell them who I am. For half a second, her expression softened. Then she looked past me at Evan, at the executives, at the room she wanted so badly to belong to. The softness disappeared. I have asked this man to leave me alone, she told Ryan. He keeps following me. Ryan turned toward me. The people around us went quiet. My wife had not forgotten who I was. She had decided that admitting it would cost her more than denying me. That was the real betrayal. Not the words themselves. The choice behind them. Ryan Caldwell looked from Claire to me, and I could see him trying to decide whether he was dealing with a misunderstanding or something more serious. He kept his voice measured. Sir, I need you to step away from Mrs. Walker. I nodded once. I understand. That seemed to surprise Claire. Maybe she expected me to argue. Maybe she expected anger because anger would make her story easier to believe. I gave her neither. Ryan gestured toward the entrance. We can talk over there. I took one step, then stopped. Before we do, Claire gets one more chance. Her face hardened. Nathan, stop. For words, I said. That is all it takes. Evan Ross stood several feet behind her now, silent, watching with the rest of them. Claire knew exactly which 4 words I meant. She also knew every second of silence made the situation worse. Please remove him, she said. Ryan moved beside me, careful and professional. His hand rested lightly near my arm as he began guiding me toward the lobby doors. I did not resist. I did not look at the people staring. I watched Claire. She let out a breath. Relief. There it was. Again. She truly believed the problem was leaving. Then the executive elevator chimed. The sound was soft, almost ordinary, but it cut through the room because everything else had gone quiet. Jonathan Mercer stepped out with 2 members of the board. He was holding a folder in one hand, glasses in the other, already speaking about something when he looked across the lobby and saw me. He stopped. The board members nearly walked into him. His eyes moved from my face to Ryan, then to Claire. Nathan, he said. Ryan paused. Claire turned so quickly that the champagne in her glass moved against the rim. Jonathan crossed the floor. What is happening? Ryan straightened. Mrs. Walker reported that this gentleman has been following her and refusing to leave her alone. Jonathan stared at him. Then he looked at Claire. This gentleman? Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jonathan lowered his voice. Ryan, take your hand away from him. Ryan immediately did. Of course, sir. Jonathan stepped closer to me. I thought we were meeting upstairs. We were. He looked around the lobby, taking in the crowd. Then why are you being escorted out? I looked at Claire. You would have to ask my wife. The word wife moved through the room like a sudden change in pressure. Evan's expression shifted first. Then Ryan looked at Claire, confusion replacing caution. Jonathan slowly turned toward her. Your wife? He repeated, not because he had forgotten, but because he could not believe what he had just heard. Claire's face had gone pale. Jonathan, this is complicated. It does not look complicated. She stepped closer. There has been a misunderstanding. I almost admired how quickly the story changed. 30 seconds earlier, I was a man who would not leave her alone. Now there had been a misunderstanding. Jonathan looked at Ryan. Do you know who he is? Ryan shook his head. No, sir. Jonathan glanced around us, then spoke quietly enough that nobody should have heard, which somehow made everyone listen harder. That is Nathan Walker. Ryan waited. The name meant nothing to him. Jonathan continued. Walker Capital Partners. Recognition appeared on one of the board members' faces. Evan looked at me differently. Claire still seemed lost. Jonathan, she said, what does Walker Capital have to do with this? He looked at her for a long second. Everything. The room seemed to shrink around us. He turned back toward Ryan. Nathan is the majority owner of Apex Meridian. Nobody spoke. Even the quartet near the far wall had stopped playing between songs, leaving only the faint hum of the ventilation system above us. Claire stared at Jonathan as though she had heard the words but could not make them fit together. Majority owner? She repeated. Jonathan nodded. Walker Capital controls 61% of the voting shares. Her eyes came back to me. That was the first time all evening she really looked at me. Not at my suit. Not at who might be watching. At me. You own this company? She asked. I control the majority interest, I said. There is a difference. Her lips parted. Nothing followed. Evan lowered his glass. Ryan took a step back. The 2 board members exchanged a glance. I could feel the entire lobby waiting for me to enjoy the moment. I did not. There was nothing enjoyable about discovering that your wife needed a balance sheet before she could remember your value. Claire finally whispered, Why did you never tell me? I looked at the woman who had just chosen strangers over the truth of our marriage. You knew I invested in companies. Not this one. You never asked. Her expression changed. Shock gave way to something sharper. Not remorse. Not yet. She was doing what she always did under pressure. Calculating. Trying to understand what this meant for her career, her reputation, her place in the room. Jonathan started to say something, but I lifted one hand. Not here. Then I looked at Claire. We are going upstairs. She swallowed. Nathan, I can explain. I held her eyes. I am sure you can. What I do not know yet is whether the explanation will make any difference. The elevator doors closed behind us, and for the first time that night, Claire had nowhere else to look. Jonathan stood near the control panel, one board member beside him, while I watched the floor numbers climb in silence. Claire kept her arms folded across herself, not defensive exactly, but contained, as if holding everything in place required effort. When we reached the 36th floor, Jonathan led us toward a small conference room overlooking the river. I had sat in that room more times than I could count. Claire had never been inside it. She noticed the framed acquisition documents on the wall, the old photographs of Apex facilities, the brass plaque near the door with Walker Capital Partners listed beneath the company seal. Her eyes moved across everything slowly. "How long?" she asked. I knew what she meant. 11 years. She turned toward me. "You have owned this for 11 years. Controlled the majority interest for most of that time. And you never thought to tell me?" Jonathan glanced at me, then quietly stepped out with the others and closed the door. Claire and I were alone. I pulled out a chair, but did not sit. "I told you what I did when we met. You said you invested in struggling companies. That was true. You did not say you own the company where I work. You never asked which companies." She stared at me as though that answer offended her. "That is not fair." "Maybe not." I looked through the glass wall toward the city. "But neither is pretending I kept some secret life from you." 11 years earlier, Apex Meridian was not a glass tower with executive receptions and polished annual reports. It was a company trying to make payroll without frightening the people who depended on it. I remember Jonathan arriving at my old office carrying binders so heavy he had to set them down twice between the elevator and the conference room. The numbers were ugly. Debt. Declining contracts. Facilities the company could no longer afford. I had seen companies die that way before, not because the people were lazy, but because too many years of bad decisions had finally arrived at the same time. Walker Capital did not rescue Apex with one dramatic check. We rebuilt it piece by piece. We negotiated with lenders. We sold equipment nobody used. We closed operations that had been losing money for years and invested in the divisions customers still trusted. I spent months in meetings where nobody cared about titles because everyone was too busy trying to keep the lights on. That was the company I knew, not the one Claire knew. "When you applied here," I said, Jonathan called me. Her eyes narrowed. "He knew?" "Of course he knew. And he hired me because of you." "No." I faced her. "That is exactly what I refused to let happen." She went quiet. I told her about the call. Jonathan asking whether I wanted to be involved. Me saying no. Human Resources handled her interviews. Her managers evaluated her work. Her promotions came through normal review. I had not recommended her once. I had not blocked anyone competing against her. I had not even attended the board discussions involving her division unless ownership required it. "I wanted your career to be yours," I said. "Completely yours." Claire looked down at the conference table. "Then why hide the ownership?" "Because the moment people knew you were married to me, every promotion would come with a question mark." She had no answer to that. "You would have wondered too," I continued. "Every compliment, every raise, every invitation. You would have asked yourself whether you earned it or whether someone was afraid to disappoint me." Her shoulders lowered slightly. For the first time since the lobby, something other than calculation appeared in her face. Confusion. Maybe even hurt. "You could have trusted me with the truth." "I did trust you." She looked up. "How can you say that?" "Because I trusted you enough not to interfere." The words settled between us. Outside the windows, headlights moved along the river road far below, small and orderly from 36 floors up. Claire walked toward the glass. "I thought you had stopped caring about work." "I stopped needing people to see me working." "That is not the same thing." "No." I waited. "It is not." She turned back. "Do you know what people here think you do?" "I have a pretty good idea. They think you barely work. Because that is what you told them." Her face tightened. "I never said that. You said I was semi-retired. Between projects. Doing some private investing." I kept my voice even. "You made me smaller because it made your story easier to explain." Claire looked away again. That was when I understood something I had missed for years. I had stayed quiet because I wanted to protect her independence. She had interpreted that silence as emptiness. I had given her room to become whoever she wanted to be, and somewhere inside that room, she had decided there was no longer space for me. "The ownership is not what bothers me tonight," I said. "Then what does?" I looked directly at her. "You knew exactly who I was before Jonathan walked into that lobby." She said nothing. "You knew I was your husband." Her eyes dropped. "And that was not enough." "You knew I was your husband, and that was not enough." Claire stood near the window with the city spread behind her, 36 floors of distance between us and the street below. For several seconds, she said nothing. The confident executive who could walk into a room of senior leaders and command attention seemed to disappear, leaving behind the woman I had once known well enough to recognize every version of her silence. This one was different. It was not thoughtful. It was defensive. I panicked, she finally said. You panicked? You showed up without warning. Evan was there. Half the leadership team was there. People were watching. I nodded slowly. So you told security I was harassing you. I did not know what else to say. That answer almost hurt more than the accusation. Not because it was cruel, but because she believed it explained something. I pulled out a chair and sat down. You could have said I was your husband. Claire rubbed her forehead. Nathan, you are making this sound simpler than it was. It was simple. Not to me. That is the problem. She turned away from the window. You do not understand what it is like for me here. Then explain it. She took a breath. Everything I have built in this company depends on how people see me. I have spent 3 years proving that I belong in those rooms. People judge everything. Clothes. Connections. Who you know. Who you marry. The last 2 words stayed in the air. I did not rescue her from them. Who you marry, I repeated. That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. She shook her head. I meant that people make assumptions. And what assumption were you afraid they would make about me? She looked at the conference table instead of answering. I waited. Silence had always been useful in business. Most people rushed to fill it. Claire did too. You do not present yourself like the people here, she said. You do not care about titles. You drive an old truck. You talk about investments like they are hobbies. You barely attend events. I thought they would look at you and wonder why I married someone who had stepped away from everything. There it was. Not the whole truth, maybe, but enough of it. Someone who had stepped away from everything. I said. That is how you saw me. I did not say that. You just did. I thought you were satisfied doing less. My hands rested flat on the table. They were steady. And that embarrassed you. Claire closed her eyes. I did not want tonight to become about my personal life. So you made it about a security incident instead. I made a mistake. No. My voice stayed quiet. A mistake is giving someone the wrong meeting time. You made a decision. She looked at me then. Really looked. What do you want me to say? The truth. I was embarrassed. The words came out barely above a whisper. I nodded once. Thank you. Her eyes filled with something I could not quite name. Regret, maybe. Or fear of consequences. I hated that I could no longer tell the difference. She moved closer to the table. Nathan, I am sorry. I studied the woman across from me. 8 years of birthdays, Sunday mornings, delayed flights, burned dinners, shared mortgages, inside jokes, family holidays. Marriage is not one moment. That is what people say when they want to believe a bad moment cannot destroy something good. Maybe they are right. But sometimes one moment does not destroy anything. It reveals what has already been disappearing. I need to ask you one question, I said. Claire nodded. If Jonathan had not walked into that lobby, what would have happened? Her expression changed. What do you mean? You know what I mean. She did not answer. Ryan was walking me toward the doors. You had told everyone I was bothering you. Jonathan was still upstairs. If that elevator had opened 5 minutes later, would you have stopped security? Claire looked down. Nathan, would you have told them the truth? I do not know. 4 words again. Different 4 words. Somehow worse. I leaned back in the chair and let them settle. She began speaking quickly. I was overwhelmed. I was not thinking clearly. I would have called you later. I would have explained everything. Later. Yes. After they removed me from the building. I said I was sorry. I heard you. She stared at me. Then what else can I do? That question told me we were standing in 2 different conversations. Claire was trying to repair an incident. I was looking at a marriage. You still think this is about tonight? I said. It is not. Then what is it about? It is about the fact that you were willing to let strangers believe the worst thing about me, because telling them I was your husband felt more embarrassing. Her face tightened. That is not fair. Maybe not. But it is true. She sat across from me now, the long conference table between us. You are acting like everything we have means nothing. No. Everything we had is exactly why this matters. My voice softened despite myself. If you were a stranger, I would already be gone. Claire looked toward the door. Are you leaving me? I did not answer immediately. For the first time that night, I was careful because I knew some words could not be pulled back once spoken. I am not making that decision in this room, I said. But something changed downstairs. Because you found out I was embarrassed by you? Because I found out your respect had conditions. She flinched at that. That is not true. Then why did your face change when Jonathan told you who owned this company? She had no answer. You knew who I was before tonight, I said. My name did not change. My character did not change. Our 8 years did not change. The only thing that changed was what you thought I was worth. Claire stared at the table, and the silence between us became heavier than anything she could have said. That was when I understood the question I had been avoiding. Since the lobby, the marriage had not cracked because my wife failed to recognize my power. It cracked because she had recognized me perfectly well and decided that, without power, I was someone she could deny. Claire sat across from me without speaking, and for the first time all evening, I could see fear replacing calculation. Not fear of me, fear of what came next. Her eyes moved toward the conference room door, then back to my face. What happens now? She asked. I knew what she meant. Downstairs, half the leadership team had watched her call security on the majority owner of the company. The same majority owner happened to be her husband. If I wanted revenge, the path was easy. One phone call, one demand, one dramatic ending that people would repeat in hallways for years. I could have told Jonathan to terminate her before midnight. I could have made her office badge stop working before she reached the parking garage. I had the voting power to make life uncomfortable for almost anyone in the building. That was exactly why I refused to do it. Nothing happens tonight, I said. Claire blinked. What? Nobody is making an employment decision tonight. She stared at me as if she expected a trap. You are not firing me. I am not firing anyone. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Relief appeared again, and this time it bothered me for a different reason. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me yet. The relief disappeared. I stood and walked toward the window. What happened downstairs involved company security, senior executives, and a false statement made by an officer of this company. That means it cannot stay between you and me. Claire stood too. Nathan, please. I admitted I made a mistake. As my wife, you owe me an explanation. As a senior vice president, you owe the company something different. It was personal. You made it corporate when you involved security. Her face tightened. So what are you going to do? Ask someone independent to determine what happened. She stared at me. An investigation? A review. That sounds like the same thing. Then call it whatever helps you understand that I will not be the person deciding the outcome. I took out my phone and called Michael Grant. He had represented Walker Capital for 14 years and had a talent for making complicated situations sound boring, which was useful when emotions were high. He answered on the second ring. Nathan, I need an independent governance review at Apex. There was a pause. Tonight. Start preserving records tonight. Interviews can begin tomorrow. Claire's face changed. Nathan. I held up one hand. Michael asked what triggered the review. Use of corporate security by a senior executive in a personal matter, possible false reporting, and any related conduct that becomes relevant. Michael's voice stayed level. Understood. Who is the executive? I looked at Claire. Claire Walker. Another pause. Shorter this time. I will make sure you are screened from the process. Good. I ended the call. Claire stared at me. You called your lawyer on your own wife. I called company counsel because I own 61% of a company where my wife just used corporate security against me. You are making this sound criminal. I did not say that. Then why preserve records? Because memories change when careers are involved. She looked away. You do not trust me. Tonight did not help. That landed. She walked to the far end of the table and folded her arms. Do you realize what an investigation will do to my reputation? Do you realize what using your position to remove someone from a building can do to someone else's? You were never actually in danger of being removed. Jonathan knew you. I let the silence sit between us. You did not know Jonathan was coming downstairs. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. That is why the review matters. A soft knock came at the door. Jonathan entered alone. His expression told me he had already spoken with Ryan. Security preserved the lobby footage, he said. Good. Claire looked at him. Jonathan, I can explain everything. He did not answer immediately. You will have that opportunity. His tone was professional now, stripped of friendship or familiarity. Claire seemed to hear the difference. Am I suspended? She asked. Jonathan looked at me. I shook my head. Not tonight. He said, go home. Human Resources and outside counsel will contact you in the morning. Claire turned toward me. You are really doing this? Yes. After 8 years? Because of 8 years. She stared at me for several seconds, then picked up her clutch and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she stopped. I thought you would protect me. I looked at her. I protected your independence for 3 years. I will not protect you from accountability. She left without another word. Jonathan waited until the door closed. You could have ended this in 5 minutes, he said. I know. Why did you not? I looked down at the city lights reflected in the conference table. Because if I use ownership to punish my wife for humiliating me, then every accusation she ever made about power becomes easier to believe. Jonathan nodded slowly. So we follow process. Exactly. I thought that would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The review I requested to understand one bad decision would uncover decisions I had never known existed, and by the next morning, the question was no longer whether Claire had embarrassed her husband. It was whether the woman I married had been building an entire professional life designed to erase him.